January 14th, 1943, Casablanca, Morocco. The winter sun beat down on whitewashed walls, casting sharp shadows across the palm-lined boulevards of a city caught between continents. Inside the Anfa Hotel, converted hastily into a fortress of strategy, cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. Two men sat across a polished mahogany table, their silence heavier than the armored divisions waiting across the Mediterranean. Winston Churchill, jowls set in stubborn determination, fingers drumming against crystal ashtrays. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, cigarette holder tilted at that familiar angle, eyes narrowed behind round spectacles. Between them lay not just maps and cables, but the entire architecture of how to win a war, and they could not agree. The sound that dominated that room was not shouting. It was the careful, controlled cadence of men who commanded millions, disagreeing with every fiber of their being while maintaining the veneer of alliance. Outside, palm fronds rustled in the Atlantic breeze. Inside, the future of the free world teetered on the edge of fracture. The Casablanca Conference was supposed to be a moment of unity, 10 days where Allied leadership would forge the hammer that would crush the Axis powers. Roosevelt had crossed the Atlantic in secret, the first American president to leave the United States during wartime since Abraham Lincoln visited the front lines of the Civil War. Churchill had flown from frozen England, leaving behind a nation exhausted by 3 years of relentless bombing. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had been invited, but refused to come, claiming the Battle of Stalingrad demanded his presence, a calculated absence that left the Western Allies to settle their differences alone. And differ they did. By January 1943, the war had reached a pivotal inflection point. The Americans had been in the fight for just over a year, their industrial might beginning to pour men and material across both oceans. The British had stood alone for 2 years before that, bloodied but unbroken, their empire strained to breaking point. These were not abstract differences. They were written in casualty lists and burned cities, in the rations of British housewives and the factories of Detroit running 3 shifts without pause. Churchill arrived at Casablanca with a clear vision: strike at what he called the soft underbelly of Europe, invade Sicily, then Italy, knock Mussolini out of the war, force Hitler to defend a second front in the Mediterranean, bleeding German strength away from the Soviet Union, and buying time, precious time, to build up forces for an eventual cross-channel invasion. It was a strategy born of British experience, of island warfare and imperial logistics, of a nation that understood the long game because it had no choice but to play it. Roosevelt and his generals wanted something else entirely. They wanted France. They wanted the direct approach, a cross-channel invasion in 1943, a dagger aimed at the heart of German-occupied Europe. American military doctrine was built on overwhelming force applied at the decisive point. The American industrial machine was roaring to life, producing ships, planes, and tanks at a rate the world had never seen. Why, the American strategists argued, should they dissipate that strength in Mediterranean sideshows when they could mass it for the kill?
The British chiefs of staff looked at their American counterparts and saw dangerous naivete. The Americans looked at the British and saw an empire protecting its Mediterranean interests while American boys bled. The first 3 days of the conference were cordial, diplomatic on the surface, but in the closed-door strategy sessions, the tension became palpable. General George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, made the American case with characteristic directness. A cross-channel invasion, Operation Roundup, as it was then called, could be launched by August 1943. 29 divisions, mostly American, would storm the beaches of northern France. It would be costly. Marshall did not minimize that, but it would be decisive. Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, listened with barely concealed frustration. His diary entry from January 15th would later reveal his thoughts. The Americans seem to think that strategic problems are solved by mathematical formulas and tonnage statistics. They have no conception of the catastrophe that awaits poorly prepared amphibious operations against a fortified coast. Brooke had reason for skepticism. The British had tried to land at Dieppe in August 1942, a raid that became a slaughter. Of 6,086 men who went ashore, mostly Canadians, 3,623 were killed, wounded, or captured in 9 hours. The beaches ran red. The lesson was written in blood. You do not assault Hitler's fortress Europe without overwhelming preparation, specialized equipment, and absolute air superiority. But there was something else beneath Brooke's objections, something unspoken but understood by everyone in that room. The British Empire was exhausted. It had been fighting since September 1939. Its cities had been bombed, its shipping had been torpedoed to the ocean floor, its manpower reserves were nearly depleted. Britain could not afford another Dieppe. It could not afford a failed invasion that would push the end of the war years further into an unknowable future. The Americans, meanwhile, burned with a different frustration. They had mobilized their nation. Factories that once produced automobiles now produced bombers. Farms that fed America now fed Allied armies. The arsenal of democracy was at full production, and its weapons were piling up in warehouses, while the British urged caution, restraint, more planning, more delay. Admiral Ernest King, commander of the U.S. Navy, suggested pointedly that if the British were unwilling to commit to Europe, perhaps American resources should be redirected to the Pacific, where Japan was still ascendant. The threat hung in the air. The alliance that held the free world together could pivot, could fracture. Churchill understood the danger. He also understood Roosevelt. The Prime Minister had spent years cultivating this relationship, writing hundreds of personal letters, hosting the President at Chequers, building bonds of personal trust that transcended strategy papers. Now he deployed that relationship with calculated precision.
On the evening of January 16th, after another bruising strategy session, Churchill invited Roosevelt to dine privately. No generals, no staff officers, just 2 men and the weight of their responsibilities. They ate in the villa Roosevelt occupied, overlooking the Atlantic, where German U-boats still prowled. Churchill ordered champagne. He always ordered champagne, and began to paint a picture. He spoke of the Mediterranean not as a distraction, but as a road to victory. Once Sicily fell, Italy would collapse. The Italian people had no stomach for more war. Mussolini's regime was a facade held together by fear and German backing. Italy's surrender would force Hitler to divert dozens of divisions southward, divisions that would not be in France when the cross-channel invasion finally came. It would secure Allied control of the Mediterranean, allowing shipping to flow freely from Gibraltar to Suez without the dangerous detour around Africa. It would open the door to the Balkans, threatening Hitler's oil supplies from Romania. Most importantly, and Churchill leaned forward as he made this point, it would keep the alliance fighting together in the European theater in 1943. Because the truth that neither man said aloud was this: the forces did not yet exist for a successful cross-channel invasion in 1943. Not enough landing craft had been built, not enough specialized armor, not enough tactical air support. The buildup would take until spring 1944 at the earliest. So the question was not France now versus Italy now. The question was Italy now or nothing now. Momentum lost. Stalin left to face Hitler alone, the alliance fraying under the weight of inaction. Roosevelt listened. He was a politician before he was a commander-in-chief, and he understood coalition warfare in ways his generals did not. He understood that the alliance with Britain was the foundation of everything else, and he understood something else, something that Churchill had cleverly woven into his argument. Americans needed to be seen fighting Germans in 1943. The American public had been promised action. To sit idle while the Soviet Union bled at Stalingrad would be politically untenable. An invasion of Sicily, followed by Italy, would be action. It would be headlines. It would be American troops liberating European soil. The compromise emerged over the next 2 days, shaped in late-night sessions and quiet walks through Anfa's gardens. There would be no cross-channel invasion in 1943. Instead, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, would would be launched by July. Following Sicily's capture, if conditions were favorable, the Allies would invade the Italian mainland, but this would explicitly be preparation for the main event, a cross-channel invasion in spring 1944, with the date and scope to be determined later. The Americans won their eventual direct assault on Germany. The British won their Mediterranean campaign for 1943.
Most importantly, both sides won something less tangible but more crucial. They remained committed to defeating Germany first, before turning full attention to Japan. In a war spanning the globe, that priority was everything. But compromise came with a price that would echo through the decades. To sell the agreement to the press and to Stalin, who was already suspicious of Western delays, Roosevelt and Churchill announced a policy that neither had fully thought through: unconditional surrender. The Axis powers would be given no terms, no negotiated peace, no armistice. Only total defeat would be accepted. The phrase had originated in Roosevelt's mind as an echo of Ulysses S. Grant's demand at Fort Donelson in the American Civil War. It sounded strong, resolute. It proclaimed to the world that the Allies would not falter. But it also meant something darker. It meant the war would be fought to absolute exhaustion, without the possibility of internal Axis resistance shortening the conflict. German generals who might have overthrown Hitler were given no reason to do so. They would hang beside him whether they acted or not. Japanese leaders who might have sought peace after losing the Pacific were told no peace existed short of complete destruction. Churchill later expressed private doubts about the unconditional surrender declaration. It had been announced almost spontaneously at the final press conference on January 24th, with minimal consultation with military chiefs or diplomatic staff. But the words had been spoken, and they could not be unspoken. The war would now be fought to the bitter end. What none of the men in Casablanca fully grasped was how fragile their alliance appeared to the enemy. German intelligence intercepted reports of the conference. In Berlin, Hitler and his inner circle pored over the news, searching for cracks. They found something more useful than cracks. They found evidence of tension. The mere fact that such a high-level meeting had been necessary suggested discord. Goebbels' propaganda machine went to work, broadcasting to every corner of occupied Europe that the Anglo-American alliance was a marriage of convenience, doomed to collapse under the weight of competing interests.
But what Hitler misread was American resolve. The Führer believed that democracies were inherently weak, that they lacked the will to endure prolonged suffering. He had watched France collapse in 1940 despite having more tanks than Germany. He had expected Britain to sue for peace after Dunkirk. Now he assumed the Americans, so far from Europe, would eventually lose interest in a war that did not directly threaten their homeland. This was perhaps the greatest miscalculation of the entire conflict. The United States had entered the war reluctantly, but once committed, American industrial and military mobilization was relentless. By the time of Casablanca, American factories were producing more war materiel than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. The numbers were staggering. One Liberty ship launched every day. One bomber rolling off assembly lines every 63 minutes. Tank production that exceeded German output by factors of 5 to 1. The British knew these numbers. They had seen American productive capacity firsthand. Churchill's agreement to delay the cross-channel invasion was not a rejection of American plans. It was a bet that by 1944, the Americans would be so overwhelmingly powerful that the invasion could not fail. Give them another year, and the floodgates would open. Give them another year, and the force that landed in France would be unstoppable. The symbolic object that pervaded Casablanca was not a weapon, it was food. The conference dinners were legendary, almost obscene in their abundance. While Europe starved under rationing and occupation, while British housewives stretched meager rations into weekly meals, the tables at Anfa groaned with roasted meats, fresh vegetables flown in from Algeria, champagne, whiskey, cigars from Havana. American quartermasters had stocked the conference with a supply chain that demonstrated, more clearly than any speech, the difference between the Allied and Axis war economies. One British officer, attending a dinner on January 18th, wrote in his diary, "The Americans serve meals that would feed a British family for a month. They do not seem to understand that this is a war of survival. For them, it is still a war of choice, fought with abundance rather than desperation." But that abundance was precisely the point. It was not accidental, it was strategic. The Americans wanted their allies to see, to taste, to understand that the United States had not merely entered the war, it had committed the full weight of an industrial civilization that could fight and eat and produce simultaneously. Britain could not do that anymore. The Soviet Union never could. Germany was already tightening belts. Japan was surviving on plundered resources from a conquered empire. Only America could set a table like this in the middle of a global war, and that table was a promise. Stay with us and we will feed your armies. Stay with us and we will supply your factories. Stay with us and we will bury our enemies under an avalanche of steel and high explosive.
Churchill understood the symbolism. He ensured that every dinner was attended by as many officers as possible. Let them see, let them remember. When doubt crept in during brutal strategy sessions, when British pride chafed at American brashness, let them remember the food on these tables and know that the future belonged to the alliance. The Casablanca Conference ended on January 24th with a carefully staged press conference. Roosevelt and Churchill sat together, projecting unity for the cameras. The unconditional surrender declaration made headlines worldwide. The strategic agreements remained classified. The tension that had nearly split the alliance was buried beneath smiles and handshakes. But the consequences of those 10 days would ripple across the next 2 years of war. Sicily was invaded in July 1943, exactly as planned. Italy surrendered in September, though German forces fought on in a brutal campaign up the peninsula. The cross-channel invasion, eventually named Operation Overlord, was launched on June 6, 1944. By then, the Americans had assembled a force so massive that even the pessimistic British generals believed it could succeed. Stalin, informed of the Casablanca decisions by telegram, expressed public satisfaction but private fury. The Soviet Union had begged for a second front in Europe, and once again it had been delayed. The Red Army would bleed through another year, 1943, largely alone, grinding forward through Ukraine and Belarus at a cost of millions. That sacrifice would shape post-war attitudes, the seeds of Cold War suspicion already germinating in the delays agreed upon in Morocco. The German military, meanwhile, began planning for what was now inevitable. The invasion of Sicily would come, then Italy, then France. The only question was how much time they could buy, how many Allied soldiers they could kill before the end. In his headquarters, Hitler raged at his generals for their pessimism, but even he began constructing the Atlantic Wall, the fortifications that would line the French coast in anticipation of the blow that was now certain to fall. In the years after the war, historians would debate Casablanca endlessly. Was it the right decision? Should the Allies have invaded France in 1943, accepting higher casualties in exchange for ending the war sooner? Or did the Mediterranean strategy save countless lives by ensuring the invasion force was truly ready when it finally came?
The debate missed the deeper truth. Casablanca was not primarily about strategy. It was about holding together an alliance between nations with fundamentally different experiences of the war, different military cultures, different political imperatives. The British had been bombed. The Americans had not. The British Empire was crumbling. The American century was ascending. These differences could have shattered the alliance. Instead, Casablanca bent it until it creaked but did not break. The genius of the conference was not in the perfection of its military decisions. It was in the willingness of proud men to compromise when pride might have destroyed everything. Churchill swallowed his fear that the Americans would abandon Europe for the Pacific. Roosevelt swallowed the impatience of his generals, who wanted decisive action now. Both men understood that the alliance itself was more valuable than any single operation. That understanding, that unity of purpose mattered more than unity of method, was perhaps the greatest strategic insight of the entire war. Germany and Japan fought as allies in name only, their strategies disconnected, their resources unshared. The Axis was an alliance of convenience that never truly coordinated. The Anglo-American alliance, forged in tension and compromise, became a genuine partnership that pooled intelligence, coordinated strategy, and shared burdens. By 1945, when Allied forces linked up at the Elbe River, when American and Soviet troops embraced amid the ruins of Nazi Germany, the foundation for that victory had been laid in Morocco 2 years earlier. Not in the brilliance of the strategy adopted, but in the simple fact that Roosevelt and Churchill chose to remain partners even when partnership was hard. There is a photograph from the final day of the Casablanca Conference. Roosevelt and Churchill sit in wicker chairs in the villa's garden, surrounded by generals and aides. Both men are smiling for the cameras, but if you look closely, and historians have looked very closely, you can see the exhaustion in their faces. 10 days of negotiation, compromise, and carefully managed disagreement have taken their toll. Behind them, just visible in the background, is a table. On it sits the remains of lunch, empty plates, half-full glasses, the debris of another abundant Allied meal. That table, more than the strategic documents or the press releases, tells the story of Casablanca. It was a conference held in a world of scarcity, planned by nations fighting for survival, but hosted by a power that still had enough to feed everyone at the table, and then some. The clash at Casablanca did not split the Allied leadership because both sides understood that splitting would mean losing. Not just losing battles, but losing the war, losing the future. The alliance survived not because disagreement was absent, but because both sides valued the alliance more than their disagreements. In the end, that may have been the most decisive victory won in Morocco. Not Sicily, not Italy, not even the commitment to invade France. The decisive victory was the decision, repeated every day for 10 days, to stay together, to argue, to compromise, to frustrate each other, but never to walk away. The war would grind on for another 2.5 years. Millions more would die, cities would burn, empires would fall, but the alliance forged in tension at Casablanca would hold, and in holding, it would reshape the world.
Decades later, when historians studied the turning points of World War II, they would cite Stalingrad for stopping the Germans, Midway for stopping the Japanese, D-Day for liberating Europe. But perhaps they should have looked more carefully at those 10 days in Morocco, when the alliance that would win the war nearly fractured over how to win it, and chose, in the end, to stay whole. That choice, made in a whitewashed hotel on the edge of the Atlantic, proved more powerful than any weapon in the Allied arsenal. It was the choice to remain united even when unity was difficult, to compromise even when compromise felt like weakness, to trust that the alliance itself was worth preserving, because without it, all the tanks and planes and ships in the world would not be enough. The palm trees still stand in Casablanca. The hotel still receives guests, but the weight of history lingers in those rooms, in the garden where Roosevelt and Churchill smiled for cameras while carrying the future of the free world on their shoulders. They came to Morocco as partners in crisis. They left as partners in compromise. And in doing so, they ensured that when the final blow against Nazi Germany was struck, it would be struck together, with all the strength that unity provides and all the sacrifice that unity demands.